You know, I was originally approaching this idea with the desire to do something like I did... was it really... whatever. To do something like I did 2 years ago. I was trying to come up with some funny categories and trying to find ways to talk about as many of the popular games as possible. I was trying to fill the necessary games to discuss quota with a top 10 or a top 5, making sure I talked about a specific number of AAA and indie and AA games. But after talking it out with some of my peers on Twitter, I realized that I don't have to do that, and maybe even more so, I can't. There are so many games that I didn't get to play: Breath of the Wild, Mario Odyssey, Horizon Zero Dawn, Hellblade, Sonic Mania, and Snake Pass, just to name a few of the popular ones. As much as I don't think end of the year wrap-up videos need to be wholly comprehensive, I do believe that a lot of these games would probably exceed my enjoyment for the games that I did get to play. That's saying a lot, by the way. I enjoyed the crap out of a ton of games this year. So instead of just trying to talk about a ton of games, or try my best to be comprehensive for the sake of justifying my opinions, I'm going to talk about the few games that I think really had a serious impact on me, games that I'm still thinking about, and games that showed me a side of themselves that I wasn't expecting. There's a lot to say about Assassin's Creed Origins, but the point that I want to focus on is the grief and guilt that the main character Bayek feels over the loss of his son at the hands of a shadowy masked group called the Order of the Ancients. The inciting incident for the game is supposed to be the death of Bayek's son, Khemu, a character that we don't learn a whole lot about before seeing his demise, but I found this part to be a little stilted. We're expected to care about both Bayek and Khemu in this scene without getting proper time to appreciate them as characters or how they connect with one another. It's too early of a reveal, in my opinion, and I think it gets in the way of the game really pulling you in. Or at least that's what I thought until much further into the game, where I think Assassin's Creed Origins really finds its footing, and it's with the death of Shadia. One of the shadowy masked figures, the crocodile, has Shadia, this beautiful little girl, kidnapped and drowned in order to send a message to her parents, Hotefres and Khemut. Just the way this moment builds up and how it reflects on Bayek and Shadia's parents is one of the best bits in the entire game, and cements the central theme of the game in a much better way than the initial event could. After Bayek realizes that Shadia is in danger, he races over to Khemut, who is sat crying because she too knows what has happened to her daughter. You use Senu to find where she is, and the camera is pointed at the water. You swim over, but you already know what happened. All you see is a body floating in the water. That moment gives me chills every time I think about it. And the moments that precede it really drive home that Assassin's Creed Origins is a game about how people react to loss and the extents to which they'll go to rectify that loss, especially in regards to children. Like I said, the initial reveal of what happened to Bayek's son is sad, but with more context as to how Bayek connects with children, and furthermore the connection he had with his son, it makes that moment so much more powerful. It's just such fantastic storytelling, and it builds an understanding of Bayek's character that most games would try to shove into that initial scene with the death of Khemu and leave it at that. But it remains consistent and powerful, and I love that. I'm not sure what exactly the reason is, but the datification of games is something that's stuck with me as I've gotten older. Thinking back on how hard The Walking Dead hit me, and how hard The Last of Us has been hitting me, it's kind of crazy. Being a dad, surrogate, or otherwise, is something that I really latch onto in stories, and maybe that has something to do with the attachment I have with male role models in my own life, and my desire to be that person for someone else. There have been tons of games that feed into that idea of playing as a father, but none about playing a father that's lost their child. I mean, yeah, the Last of Us, but the story of Bayek as a man that finds children so reliant on him is something that I think is really touching. A man who's forced to live with the sense of being a failed father to his now dead son finds himself being one for so many others. And I think if it was possible to wrap up the game's message in a single line from an after-school special, it'd be, even after you stop being a dad, you're always going to be a dad. I think if you found yourself tired of where Assassin's Creed as a franchise has been going and you've wanted something fresh, then I can definitely recommend you give this one a try. Or I could, if it wasn't for the microtransactions, but that's a story for another time. So, okay, this one's going to get kind of real, because What Remains of Edith Finch hits me in a way that I'm probably not alone in, but it's one that gives me a very bittersweet feeling towards this game. So, buckle in. I've had to record this like 4 times. What Remains of Edith Finch is a game about finding out what happened to the main character Edith Finch's family, how they lived their lives, how they treated the space in which they lived, and ultimately, how they died. You spend the whole game wandering around the Finch estate, working your way through mostly trivial puzzles in order to find out what happened to Edith's family. Each of her family members perished in a different way, but growing up she never really knew why. Before she could learn anything, her mother had all the doors sealed off, and Edith never got to learn how or why so much of her family met such a tragic demise. Each family member has a space that's all their own, that they decorate however they please, and once you interact with a certain artifact from that person's life, you learn how that member of the Finch family perished. A lot of these are presented in a way that is clearly a hyper-exaggeration of the true accounts, but they're how the characters describe that family member's last moments. In a lot of cases, they're sad and confusing and seem entirely avoidable. And of course, they're always bookended with Edith learning more about the person than she could have ever known from the offhand accounts her family would have told her. And the main reason What Remains of Edith Finch really connected with me is because I relate to Edith and her struggle to understand her family. When I was very young, my father was murdered. I've heard stories about how, and offhand knowledge from other family members. I've had to piece together on my own what really happened, but I don't know a lot about him. I can ask my mom, but much like Edith's mother, she sealed away the stories, left them in their rooms to keep us hidden from the truth. I can peek through the keyhole every once in a while from random conversations, but I can never get the full picture. I've never really known. I might never know. I'll never get the closure that Edith gets in this game. But playing it made me reconsider that no matter what I hear from anyone, it may never be the truth. Considering how all of the accounts of the deaths of each character are so romanticized and presented in fantastical ways, how can we know that really anyone is telling the truth about what happened to them in this game? If I could ask my father what happened to him, who knows if even he would tell me the truth about who he was or how he got to that point in his life. If I could see where he lived, would that give me a glimpse into who he was? Or would I just be as lost as before, piecing together a set of facts that I'm still interpreting on my own? I might never know. And that's why Edith Finch hit me so hard. It made me want to find an answer to something that I can never have, while also reminding me that even if I could, that answer would likely never be wholly true. Maybe it's not our place to know the full extent of these stories. And that depresses the hell out of me. But it's real, and nothing's ever made me feel that way before. So, okay. I'm cheating because these are two different games, but I appreciate them both for pretty much the exact same reason. It would take me forever to explain Nier Automata's story and consider all the themes it's trying to cover, and Subsurface Circular is so short that explaining anything devalues the questions that it's asking. But these two games made me consider two specific and interwoven questions. Is artificial life still life? And will it be more valuable than non-artificial life? In a lot of senses, that seems like a silly question, but Nier Automata and Subsurface Circular really made me consider just how silly those questions are. I mean, both delve into the expendability of artificial life and how quickly we can create things that are born with a singular purpose to only inevitably be destroyed. We give things consciousness and understanding of their existence, only for us to turn that off with the flip of a switch. For us to decide that the created life is one whose usefulness is held above its desire for survival. Again, there's so much that each of these games made me consider about these topics, and both of them are totally different games. Nier isn't as defeatist as it might seem with this topic, especially if you get the very, very final ending. In fact, I'd go as far as to say it's somewhat optimistic, but even then it still presents artificial life as something that can be used. Each of the Yorha androids have specific roles that they're assigned to. They're given singular purposes, and it's their sole duty to carry out the function that the job requires. And that's really depressing from a life standpoint. Imagine if you were to create a machine with consciousness, one that's acutely aware of its existence and believes that its singular purpose is one that must be carried out to ensure the continuation of a belief that it's instilled with, only for it to find out that that belief is made up. Now imagine if instead of it being a machine, it was a person. Suddenly that becomes a lot harder to process. Contrast that with Subsurface Circular, that presents the same sort of scenario, but places the utilitarian-looking robots as the focus of the story instead of on the androids. The question is still the same, but their presentation changes the attachment. At one point, the machines even refer to the Uncanny Valley theory as to why they might not have any degree of human skin. I mean, apart from how hard it is to avoid the pitfalls inherent in creating an artificial-looking human, imagine a society that creates machines that are almost indistinguishable from themselves, both inside and out, that exist within the same space, and have the same lust for life and a purpose. Now imagine that society decides that they are to be created with only a singular set of skills and need to be capable of being destroyed or wiped at a moment's notice. How would a society come to terms with that? And furthermore, why does the lack of any prosthetic flesh change the fact that these machines are clearly capable of rational thought and come as close to being conscious as one would expect of a person? The more I think about what each of these games has to say, the more, again, I think about how silly those questions really are. How is artificial life less important when it isn't capable of constructing life, which it too treats as lesser? Maybe I'm getting a little flowery with this, but that's why these games really hit me. They made me consider things that I had never even wanted to consider before, and have me looking up books that talk about philosophy and robotics, and that's kind of amazing because I don't read books. Now there are more games that I could have talked about, and like I said, I tried talking about, but none of them got me thinking like these four. None of the other games I played this year made me ask questions of myself that were as important or stuck with me in the way that these ones did. I enjoyed Death of the Outsider, and Resident Evil 7, and The Sexy Brutale, and loads of other games, but none of them made me think about my dad, or working through grief, or the value of life, artificial or otherwise. I appreciated this year, and I think it goes without saying that this was one of the best years for gaming in a long time. And here's to a hopefully less shitty 2018 with more videos from me and maybe other things. Watch out.